Hello and welcome to IndieCider, where I play indie games and then interview the developer. I'm your host, Ken Gagne, and this week on episode number 48 for August 17th, 2016, I'm playing Lifeless Planet, developed by Stage 2 Studios and published by Serenity Forge. You may recall that Serenity Forge created the game Luna's Wandering Stars, which was a previous episode of IndieCider. Let's go ahead and play Lifeless Planet. We're going to start at the very beginning. This game came out for PS4 just recently, but it came out for PC and Mac some years ago, and for Xbox One last year in 2015. And it's just recently that they've had a PS4 release. The PS4 version features an overhauled, updated graphics engine from the original. This game is set on an alien planet which our NASA probes had indicated would be lush and full of life, but we have crash landed, our team members are lost, and we have to figure out what went wrong. So let's check here, and there's some great voice acting.
It feels like I have a concussion. Where's my crew?
The voice acting tends to be sort of a summary of the text that is included in your log here. And let's see, so it is a barren, lifeless planet all around. So let's follow this little trail right here, see what's going on there. I also see some stats in the upper left. I'm not accustomed to seeing those. Maybe that is an option I accidentally enabled. No, in fact, I think it is because I have played this chapter before.
Crap.
And so now I can sort of do a speed run against my previous performance. Now, I saw something flash over there. That is true. If I had gone in any direction but following this little trail, I would have run out of oxygen and died. The game doesn't really specify that to you. You just have to figure it out. Fortunately, there is very little penalty to death. You just get to start that area over. I can also jump quite a ways because there's low gravity on whatever planet this is. This is not Earth. That we know. Whichever planet we have landed on, it is not from which we launched. So let's suit up here. I now have 8 hours of oxygen left. That's a very conveniently placed oxygen tank. Let's keep following the trail into the hinterlands. So this actually seems a little bit like Journey in a way. That being the classic PS3 game from that game company, now also available on PS4. I've bought that game and mean to do a Let's Play of it, but not yet. There are some surprises in this game.
That even at twice the speed of light, your journey will take 50
I'm going to pause here for this voice acting narration exposition.
That's right. We'll be traveling so fast, our spacecraft will arrive at the planet before the transmission of this interview does. But it's still such a long trip. We'll be put into a sort of coma. Our heart rate will be slowed dramatically to minimize aging during the flight.
How do you prepare for this one-way mission, knowing you will never return to Earth?
Well, I have a volunteer crew of very skilled and focused individuals. We all have a deep desire to explore, to go somewhere new. And frankly, we also have few attachments here on Earth.
Whee! Made it. And now I'm in the foothills. So not all is as it seems on this planet. Lifeless, it is not. In fact, you will encounter other life, other organisms. But more recently than that, you will encounter some very strange... Oh no! It's only been there for 140 million years. Why not? There are some very strange phenomena which will make themselves known in short order. I'll be speaking with the creator of this game, Mr. David Board of Stage 2 Studios. I was put in touch with him.
At least my jetpack works. Well,
So now I can basically do a double jump. Sigh. Docs. Okay. I was put in touch with Mr. David Board by Z, who I previously interviewed on the IndieCider show for Luna's Wandering Stars, and hope to have another game of his on the show soon. I believe it's called The King's Bird. So watch for that episode. Let me get through this little platforming level, and then I'll bring on David to chat about the development of this game. It was one of the top 20 most funded Kickstarters in the video game space. When he ran the Kickstarter 5 years ago in 2011, it's one of the earliest known games to be on Kickstarter, really. Of course, not as early as the very first ever game to be on Kickstarter, which was also a previous episode of this game, that called High Strangeness for the Wii U. So now using my jetpack to do sort of a little double jump here and make these longer jumps. That's why I kept falling, is because I had already forgotten about that new ability. Whoop. Oh! Double jumped a little too far. And I have to start all the way over. Some people have complained about the camera angle in this game. I don't find it to be very problematic. Platforming is by its nature a tricky business. I did not play the PC or Mac versions of this game, so I can't attest to how improved the graphical fidelity is. Whoop, there, that was just a single jump. There we go. And got it.
Why are there no signs of life
Let's see.
planet?
So I will continue along my way. There will be some small puzzles to solve, and bigger puzzles make themselves known while I interview Mr. David Board. If you are interested in hearing just the audio without the gameplay you are now watching, you can find the audio version of this game at indiecider.net/48, as well as show notes to all the various resources and references mentioned in this episode. Thanks for watching. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. David Board, partner at Stage 2 Studios. Hello, David.
Hello, Internet worlds.
How are you doing today?
Okay, how are you?
Excellent. Congratulations on the PS4 launch of Lifeless Planet.
Yeah, thanks. It's exciting, and we're now Steam, Xbox, and PS4. So, and actually, we're working on a Linux beta that you can pick up over at Steam too, but not quite officially released. But yeah, it's been a long time coming to PS4, but we're excited.
How long have you been working on the PS4 version?
Honestly, it's taken the better part of the last year, and that's been one of the challenges being a very, very small development team. Originally created Lifeless Planet pretty much on my own. Had lots of help from, Kickstarter backers and supporters, and hired a music composer. Rich Douglas did a fantastic score. Voice actors, I don't speak Russian. Translators, that sort of stuff. But yeah, it was a very ambitious one-person project. But since then, we've got a fantastic programmer who has been assisting with the ports, and then since added an employee who is another staff here at Stage 2 that's been helping with a lot of the QA and some of the art for the updated versions. And then the PS4 version is actually a collaborative effort with the studio Serenity Forge out of Colorado. They're a larger team, and are doing some really exciting things that mesh well with sort of our philosophy of games as tools to make change, or at least inspire people towards doing interesting things.
This game came out for Xbox One just over a year ago. PS4 version just came out last month in July of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Do I understand correctly that extra time was used to implement a major graphics upgrade?
Yeah, so essentially, Lifeless Planet is a Unity game. It came out originally on Unity 3, which I think was the first really robust Unity build. But then for Xbox One, we ported to the Unity 4 engine, which helped a lot with graphics, and we added a lot of new details over the PC version, which we then backported. But the PS4 version is been updated for Unity 5, which makes major visual improvements to the shader engine and the way that lighting is rendered. And so, of course, there was a lot of challenges to that too, but I think it was worth it. In addition, we went back and essentially remastered the astronaut model. Obviously, the main character is the one that you see the most and are up close and personal with. And we doubled the texture resolution. Although, in my opinion, it's an even bigger update than that, and then also made some refinements and added some details to the model itself. So the main character is also greatly improved as well.
Did all these updates and upgrades make their way back to the Xbox and Steam versions as well?
They haven't yet, and I haven't announced anything on that yet. Again, it's challenging with being a small team, but I think past history is probably a guide. We've tried real hard to make updates available to previous platforms. But it's one of the benefits too of getting the newest release.
What is going on
You have the
here?
PS4 version. You do have the newest best version right now, and we try to work that both ways when possible. So it what ends up being is it usually means it takes us a lot longer to do everything that we want to do, but we do try really hard to engage with fans and answer every email and post across Steam and social media. And it's, again, sometimes it takes a day or two, but we try really hard to connect with
What is the point of all this?
everything in that way, and be supportive as a community who's given us so much and makes this all possible.
The Steam version of the game is listed as being published by Lace Games and KISS Limited, whereas the PS4 version, as you mentioned, is done in collaboration with Serenity Forge. How did that relationship with Serenity Forge develop?
Yeah, so again, our philosophy of building games kind of grows out of our philosophy as a studio. We started as just work for hire,
How is this
doing
possible?
web development work and web interactives and smaller games, but we always specialized in work for nonprofits and education outfits. Our feeling is it's fun to make media, but it's really fun to make media that makes a difference in the world, that makes some kind of change, or at least inspires other people to get interested in topics like science or other kinds of education. So when we released Lifeless Planet, we did things like put it's not a big thing, but there are, you're an astronaut on a planet, so obviously you're going to explore and collect geologic samples. And so we made sure that those were accurate to the kinds of things you might find on a planet. And of course, minerals are pretty universal, so there's things you find on Earth as well, which is kind of interesting. The other commitment we made was, when we sold the game and it did do well beyond our expectations, we made a commitment to put some of the proceeds back towards good causes, in particular science education. So we've made a couple of donations to the Burke Museum here in Seattle, the Natural History Museum, and we also thought it would be fun to go back to the Indie Mega Booth here at PAX Prime, where we were lucky enough to get a booth for 2 years in a row with Lifeless Planet and sponsor another mini boother. And so that's what we did. We actually found last year 2 small indies, and we paid their booth fees for the 2 days they were at PAX Prime with proceeds from Lifeless Planet. And one of them was Serenity Forge. And again, we picked them because they have kind of the same cultural, I guess, mission to make content that makes a difference, and that relationship has really grown as we realized we had even more in common with about how our studios work and that sort of thing. So that's exciting.
It's great when you find someone who shares your core values and your principles like that.
Pretty low myself.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned that this game had a lot of support not only from Serenity Forge but also from Kickstarter, which is a campaign that you ran for crowdfunding 5 years ago. That's your game is what success looked like before Double Fine, because you raised $17,000.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And the crazy thing about that is, if now you've finished with $17,000, it's like, okay, well, good for you. We'll see what you do with it. But at the time, believe it or not, that put us in the top 20 most funded video game projects, if you can believe that. So it was a huge success at the time. It was about 3 months before Double Fine and the Kickstarter explosion. And when I tell people that, they say, "Oh man, you must be kicking yourself." Well, the thing is, when we did succeed, and it was a new thing, and it was sort of the beginning of the revolution, we got, yes, not a crazy amount of money, although at the time it was like, heck man, 17 grand to make a video game, this is cool. What it did give us, because we were one of the new kids on the block, it gave us a ton of publicity. We got featured, on the homepage of PC Gamer, Rock Paper Shotgun, Joystick at the time, and on and on and on. Most major gaming sites carry the news of our Kickstarter, and you don't get that now. You really have to be a huge breakout. You almost have to be popular before you come to Kickstarter to get a solo feature. And I think now, even still, sites like Rock Paper Shotgun, they'll just post, here's 20 Kickstarters we think are interesting this week. They don't get an exclusive mention. So that I think was really helpful, and I don't, bird in the hand versus two in the bush. Maybe we would have done better if we had launched, a month after Double Fine, or like a lot of other Kickstarters since, we would have just been buried in the back of the catalog, and there's a lot of good stuff on there that just doesn't get discovered because there's so much now. So yeah, it's definitely a historical thing at this point. Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of other indie developers who have used Kickstarter, most of them after Double Fine. For example, earlier this year I spoke with the developers of The Flame and the Flood, which raised $250,000 on Kickstarter.
Yeah, crazy.
And when you take into account all the expenses that go into developing indie games, they make it sound like they need at least that much. Was $17,000 enough for Lifeless Planet?
No, our budget was closer to $250,000 as well.
Oh my goodness.
But, the way it worked was, at the time I thought, I can do a limited scope project, and basically if I, work another 20 hours a week myself, hey, that's my time, I can eat that. And maybe a $30,000 budget or so would get me there. So if I can get 15, that gets us halfway there. In the end, with the the quick success of the Kickstarter, I had the craziest things happen. During the Kickstarter, I had the movie studio that created the Harry Potter movies call me about possibly securing rights. And of course, nothing came of that. But there were just all these crazy things. We got a publisher who called us up. That was Lace, who is actually not in the publishing game as of this point. But they called us from London, flew us over to sign a deal for worldwide distribution on PC, Mac, and did a retail version as well over in Europe, which is, again, unusual. 5 years later, everything is digital. But yeah, just all the crazy success, and that led to, they actually provided additional funding, more than we got through Kickstarter, and we were able to secure some investors as well that also gave more than we earned on Kickstarter. So that pool began to grow quite a bit. And then, the rest of it was kind of what was a little project. I said, gosh, I got to make a good game here, and so put in a lot more time than I had originally intended. It took another just over 2 years to get it to Steam, which was a lot longer than I originally thought, but part of that was to make it a better game. But yeah, all told, and then, we also paid royalties to a lot of the contributors, and so we've paid tens of thousands to supporters, investors, and contributors who actually, provided content that went into the game. And so, if you factor all that up, it's easily closer to 200,000 what was actually kind of spent. Some of that was, just in my time, but you have to factor that, we had and still have a business that pays the bills. So we put in 20, 30, 40, 50 hours a week on something, and that obviously does account for a lot.
But that 17,000 was still enough to make a difference, including all the publicity it generated.
It was, and Kickstarter says, they still, I think in their FAQ, they say, look, it's more about building your community than the money. And especially you go in the first time, you're like, no, but it's really about the money. It actually isn't. I agree completely. And especially in our case, being so new, getting full page features in Game Informer and stuff like that. wouldn't have happened, I don't think. I mean, you just never know, but what I can guarantee is it did happen because we did get featured and got featured early in Kickstarter and had early success. So yeah, those connections with the community and the audience that has, obviously grown into a fan base for Lifeless Planet, that was critical.
Before you could even bring the project to Kickstarter, you had to have a concept of what the game would be, and you mentioned that you were inspired by some of your childhood games, such as The Dig, Another World, Myst, and Riven. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm getting
So
to
the
be
Russians
an old
found
dude
some
at this
kind of
point.
portal
I grew up in the
and
80s
transported
with,
them to this planet.
kind of the advent of Nintendo,
And
and
things
for
went
our family,
terribly
consoles, like, well, that'll just rot your brain. We'll get you a Commodore. Which in hindsight, I'm really thankful to my parents for that. I'd play Nintendo games at my friend's house and say, well, gosh darn it, if I don't have Mario, I'm going to make it myself, So I'd come home and real quick, and just kind of my personality, I've always, I think, had more enjoyment out of making and creating than playing. I mean, they've both been a part of my life, but yeah, since I was a kid, I was making games. And also, I've always enjoyed science and science fiction. I grew up watching TV shows like The Twilight Zone and some of those old sci-fi B movies from the 50s, 60s, the Cold War era. So that definitely influenced the story of Lifeless Planet, which honestly started off really kind of with this basic idea to make a game. And naturally, I had actually created this astronaut character for another project I had in mind. It wasn't a game at all, actually, but I thought, okay, so I've got this astronaut that I've created and was really starting to get heavy into 3D modeling. And I said, I wonder how hard it is to throw him into Unity and get him running around. And it turns out it took just an hour or so. And creating terrains was pretty easy, and so he's running around on this Mars-like planet. And I thought, well, gosh, man, with a little bit of a story, it wouldn't be too hard to create something, interesting. Again, my scope was so limited early on. It was, just more of a proof of concept or anything else. But then just kind of the whole project, all the way through, just kind of evolved and grew, and pieces and parts just dropped together. I've always found that with creative projects, some of the best ones are not this grand, amazing plan, or if they are, even the way they kind of just naturally, organically change and evolve sometimes will surprise you. Sometimes your best ideas, they just take stinking forever to get out the door, and they, it's just a challenge. But the ones that are really exciting, like Lifeless Planet, just kind of snuck up on me. And so I had this kind of astronaut on a planet. I said, all right, I got to think story. And so did some reading about script writing and then story design and game design. And I ran across one source that, said, ask the question, what would be the most unusual, interesting thing, to discover. So I got to thinking about Lifeless Planet, and I thought, there's a heck of a lot of games about landing on a planet and running into some weird bug-eyed alien, but what would happen if you traveled light years away to another planet and found that humans had already been there? And for me, that was just like the spark that started the story. And I think it's still, even now, the hook that makes the game interesting and harkens back to kind of those old sci-fi Cold War space race stories about, you get to another planet and the Russians have already been there. So it's a story that, in a way doesn't take itself too seriously, kind of has fun, like some of those old sci-fi stories, the old school science fiction, but it also isn't just, I hope people enjoy the ending as well. It does, leave some mysteries unsolved, but it does try to kind of wrap up the overall story as well.
So if Lifeless Planet were a novel, the setting would certainly be sci-fi, but what sort of genre would the storytelling be? Would it be thriller, mystery?
So, yeah, I one of the books that I read writing sort of the story for Lifeless Planet is a book called Save the Cat. And it's a popular book, I guess, on writing screenplays for films. And he has a very interesting take on genre, actually. He says the traditional genres that you hear really don't do a fantastic job always of describing the actual narrative of the story. And he has some really interesting kind of what he calls his genres. One of them is Guy with a Problem. And so it's movies like Die Hard. You've got a regular dude, kind of going at the beginning of the movie, trying to go about his day, fly home for Christmas or whatever it is. And then all hell breaks loose and he's stuck in the middle of trying to figure out how to, resolve the situation or maybe just survive. And that's the one I circle back to for Lifeless Planet. And the philosophy was, here's a guy who, if you know anything about astronauts, they are, selected for their ability to remain cool, calm, and problem-solving mindset when you're literally in a tin can, cannot stand up, you're so crammed in this capsule, and you're gonna be there for days. And man, my panic attack, I love space exploration, but I'm not gonna be able to do it till they've got those lush space hotels with artificial gravity. I just don't know that I could do, stuck in a tiny seated position staring at a control panel with a little porthole window to blackness. Man, I have nightmares about space. So anyway, these guys are cool, calm, and collected. And they're also, very often they're scientists. They are selected for multidisciplinary kind of mindsets and backgrounds. And so my thought was, what happens to a guy like that who gets stuck in a situation that he cannot explain? I mean, that of course you're going expecting alien life and we're going to sample plants and we maybe have to think about, what kind of animal life there might be. But instead he is hit with this situation, and without spoiling the story, some characters, life forms maybe that he cannot classify or explain in a traditional sense. And what do you do with that? I grew up in a pretty religious background. All my life I've been kind of interested in the balance and the play between what we know to be true and factual and can analyze scientifically versus religious or other phenomenon and belief systems. I like the idea of a guy who is very again, analytical, scientific minded, but is faced with things that he can't explain, but still tries to hang on to his sense of reality as things start to get more and more warped and crazy.
So your story is about a man who goes into space and lands on an alien planet, whereas in the current day and age, we have what seems to be a focus on sending satellites and rovers and machines out into space.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a misstep, that we've lost our sense of personal risk and exploration that we had when we were sending men up into space back in the 60s and 70s?
No, I'm sure there's no doubt. If we had people up on Mars, and I hope I do get to see that in my lifetime, we'd have a lot more excitement and enthusiasm around science and exploration. So in that sense, I'd say, we've lost it. At the same time, NASA's kind of doing what they can do with their budget, and they are doing some awesome, crazy cool stuff. I've followed the recent Mars missions closely, followed SpaceX from their very first launches and failures. So there are still human stories in what's going on. But yeah, man, I'm very jealous of my parents, that got to witness the moon landings, and it's just a shame that we haven't even been back to the moon. And yet, I mean, again, as somebody who's, just an enthusiast, but, have tried to, read up on those stories and those missions, they were extraordinarily dangerous. And the Apollo 13 movie was very cool, but it sums it up, man. I mean, we almost lost those guys. It was very close to a tragedy, and of course we've lost 2 space shuttles, which each, we're talking, what, 7 or 8 people each, and so that's a near Earth, a low Earth orbit kind of mission. So nothing like the moon missions. If we were still sending, and when we do send again, we will lose humans again. So it's a big undertaking, and NASA doesn't have the funding it used to have. So I understand that. But yeah, I think once we do things like SpaceX are exciting to me because they are sort of, with the reusability and returning rockets, they're lowering the cost, and also here locally. Bezos, the Amazon guy, and all these other companies that are on the verge of making spaceflight accessible and common. I mean, that's when things will really change, and you and I will have the chance to buy a ticket. And it might be pricey, but it's going to be hard decision to make in our 50s or 60s and say, you know what, let's make this happen.
Well, Richard Garriott already did it. Did you see his documentary, Man on a Mission?
No, I didn't see that.
I highly recommend it. It's the creator of the Ultima franchise, and he basically says that the entire reason he got into game development was to make enough money to go into space. It was like a 40-year mission for him.
Wow, that's cool.
Do you think that space exploration in general, or even Lifeless Planet in particular, got a slight boost in popularity thanks to movies like The Martian?
Yeah, I'm sure of that. And it's funny, when you take years to complete your project, you see all kinds of films and other games come out, and you're like, well, that's a little bit about what we were doing. I can't think of what it was right now, but there's a couple cases where I tweaked something that an idea I had came out in another game or another project, and I didn't, even though I think I thought of it first, by the time my game came out, somebody else had done this or that. And so yeah, it's always challenging. They used to concern me or scare me more, but what I realized is, in reality, there isn't anything completely new. If you have an idea, someone else has probably thought of it or something like it. Or you'll see some old movie from the 50s and you're like, well, yeah, that's kind of like the, this or that in my story. But what you do is just try to make it your own and put an interesting twist on it. The Martian and Gravity, the space station, disaster movie, those kind of things. Interstellar, I think, had some definite parallels to the Lifeless Planet story, probably even more than those others. Yeah, it's kind of a fun world right now. I think science, just as a topic, even in pop culture and entertainment, is more popular than ever. Loved the Battlestar series. I was kind of watching that as I was in the early days of thinking about and creating Lifeless Planet. So yeah, it's a fun time. I guess, kind of branching out a little bit, that's one of the things I think is cool about making games today, is that whether you're a gamer or a developer, you can have these niche games like Lifeless Planet that maybe isn't a Halo or a Call of Duty size audience or appeal, but there's a heck of a lot of people that, for as popular as science fiction is and space exploration is, granted we just got No Man's Sky, but there's not that many space exploration games, especially when Lifeless Planet released. You would have thought there might have been more. It tends to be the Space Marines and Halo style stuff, not more the rooted in kind of hard sci-fi. Let's go explore a planet. What would that be like? Of course, there's lots of twists in Lifeless Planet with the story, but that was sort of that was one of the appeals to me. Is I often say I wish I could play my own game. At the end of the day, I think I do probably make my games for myself as much as for anybody else. But that's what's cool, is if I like something, the odds are there's a heck of a lot of other people out there who like it too. And since media, I feel like we've come full circle in a way where back in the 80s I would play games that were created by one or two people. And those were some of the big hit games even. played, some of the early adventure games by the Double Fine people, but LucasArts back in the day, and then as technology grew and the game industry expanded, things kind of shifted to AAA, and if you didn't have a big studio, as computers and consoles advanced, it was kind of a given. You had to make a really a cutting edge graphical game, and but then with the kind of the rise of accessibility of game engines, Unreal and Unity, you had kind of, I think, a second wave of individuals and small teams getting back into creating games, and games that looked pretty good. And of course, indies are often thought of like the retro 8-bit art and stuff like that, or 16-bit or whatever, but you can actually make a pretty graphically a good looking game and still be a small team. And so then you have that flood of stories and ideas that you couldn't have, except to like I say, maybe coming full circle to games in the early days of video games when you did have a lot of small teams and some really unique, interesting ideas. So I think it's a fun time to be creating games and also to be buying games. You kind of have a lot of choice that you didn't have before.
So we have a lot to look forward to, lots of great indie games to choose from, manned missions to Mars, I hope. What about the future for Lifeless Planet? The original Kickstarter suggested that we might see this game on iOS and Android. Is that in the future?
Yeah, and I think if we do anything to mobile, it wouldn't be the original game. My early plans for the game was a much simpler sort of platformer with a little bit of a story. But I don't know that the controls and the story, the sound and the music and the atmospherics are so important, and that's sometimes hard to do in mobile, sitting at a coffee shop with earbuds. It became more of a desktop console experience, I think. So I don't know, not that it couldn't be done, but I think it wouldn't lend well in its current form to mobile. So what we might do, and this is just speculation, but we might do some kind of a mobile spin-off or take the stories and themes and ideas and make something for mobile. But, mobile's a tough nut to crack. I think one of the, just from a purely sort of business financial success sense, one of the best decisions I made was to make it. Originally, I had planned to do a mobile game, and then I said early on, this story I think makes more sense for desktop console, and I think that was a good decision for us. Again, at least for the type of game I wanted to make, because you can hit mobile and have a good experience, but just be lost in the hundreds of thousands of games that are there. It's also hard to make a game like this that I think wouldn't lend well to free to play. It would be hard to sell this thing for the $5 or $10 I'd want to. That's just kind of unheard of on mobile. But yeah, I think you may see something on mobile. In terms of the future, I can't talk about future projects, but there are future projects, and fans of Lifeless Planet will be very excited. We're in the middle of the PS4 launch, so I don't want to steal any thunder from that, but in the coming months, I think you will hear about upcoming projects from Stage 2, and it's exciting times. It's fun to be able to this indie game, it's if people, if I said what we made, and it's been frankly, it's I'll release numbers before too long once we get all the PS4 numbers in, but we've made hundreds of thousands, and yet like I said, it's hundreds of thousands are spent on this, and so I'm glad we've made enough to keep going, but we're by no means rolling in our Scrooge McDuck or whatever his name is, kind of piles of money.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you've at least broken even. I hope that bodes well for the future of the game, the company, and the franchise. Can you remind our listeners where to find you and your game online?
Yeah, so it's lifelessplanet.com. And again, if you reach out or have questions, even if it's, stuff like, hey, I'm working on a game, how do I get into this? I'd be happy to answer. Again, can't always be an instant answer, but I do really try to engage in help out. And of course, we're on also the main social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter, and on Steam, Xbox One, and now, yay, best version ever on PS4.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, David. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it.